Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your little break and the lovely refreshments outside. So I'm now going to introduce a video about the newly set up Alport Research Hub. This has been funded by Stonygate Trust, a charity within the UK, and administered by Kidney Research UK. As a patient, and I'm sure as all the other patients are as well, I'm totally inspired to see people investing in such critical programs, such as this one, to look at new treatments, particularly in gene therapy.
Hello, I'm delighted to introduce to this audience the newly formed Alport Research Hub. This was opened and launched in April 2022 with a vision of transforming the understanding and treatment of Alport syndrome through robust, reproducible clinical and laboratory research, very grand vision. And our outcomes, anticipated outcomes over the next 5 years, to continue on our quest to understanding disease mechanisms in Alport syndrome, to identify genetic and clinical risk factors for more severe disease, and to help with the preclinical testing of new treatments in Alport syndrome. This is a collaborative effort funded through Kidney Research UK and the Stonygate Trust, and it brings together teams in Manchester, London, and Edinburgh. The people that we have on board so far include myself, Neil Turner in Edinburgh, Danny Gale in London, and our fantastic team of postdoc and technical experts, as well as Angela, who will be our project coordinator. In terms of the physical hub, which is based in Manchester, we're wanting to test approaches in vitro and in vivo to understand more about the detailed function of basement membranes. So we'll continue to improve the tools that we have available to us for understanding mechanism, but also for testing new drug targets. And we need to have good in vivo models to do this. And this allows us to test a number of things, small molecules and treatments that are in current development, effectiveness of potential gene therapy strategies. So we've got a really nice platform of tools that we can use for this testing. In the virtual hub, this is where we will really dive into understanding more about the genetics of Alport syndrome and how this links in to the phenotypes that we see in our patients. And so we're going to drive for complete registration of patients into our UK registry, and we want to enrich the data that we're collecting, then perform detailed analysis of genetic and other influences. We're planning to do detailed genetics with genomic sequencing and detailed phenotyping where we're enriching the data. And where could this lead to? It could identify who may benefit from new treatments. It could also help us to determine bespoke therapies, personalised treatments for individuals. Finally, there's an opportunity to link into our wider international community through new projects that are funded. And so we have within the funding allowance for the programme, we wanted to make sure that we could capture new work coming through. And so there will be an opportunity in each of the next 3 years for a project to link into the hub, and this will all be led through Kidney Research UK, and projects will be evaluated in the usual peer review manner. So that's a really brief introduction to the Alport Research Hub, and I'd be very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel, are you there online to take any questions? You are. You're welcome. Rachel. Does anybody have any questions for? We do. It's late in the UK.
I know. I have a quick question, then you can go to bed, Rachel.
Thank you.
I just was curious for, do they have to be UK researchers to apply for funding, or do they have to collaborate? What do you know what those parameters are?
Yeah, so we're figuring this out right now with Kidney Research UK. It's very likely that we will need to follow and align with the funding processes within Kidney Research UK, and that right now requires that one of the investigators will be UK based, but we're in discussions about that, and what we don't want to lose opportunities to do is to link out to our much wider community. So the first round will be at some point next year, and by the end of this year, I want to have get to the point where we can communicate more details about the process. And sorry about that little panic there. My button on the computer where my mute button just wouldn't work for a moment, so I had a bit of a panic.
Bless you. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, any other questions? No? Just check online. I don't think there are questions online. There aren't any other questions online, Rachel. We have got the video that was put together about the hub that we were going to run quickly now, if that's all right, so that we can hear from some of the other people who are involved. Rachel, thank you so much. We really appreciate you staying up. Okay, cue the video.
The idea of a hub came up when people were asking what would really help Alport research.
And the focus of the hub is
The idea of a hub came up when people were asking what would really help Alport research.
And the focus of the hub is on improving diagnosis and specific treatments for Alport syndrome.
It brings together expertise in various aspects of Alport syndrome, both genetic, biological and clinical, to provide the infrastructure and resources to facilitate further research, particularly translational research.
It's been brought together by the Stonygate Trust in collaboration with Kidney Research UK. The physical hub will be based in the laboratories in Manchester that I lead.
And it's not exclusively for the UK, it's much broader. It's encouraging researchers from abroad to collaborate with the teams in the UK.
So if everybody who wants to do Alport research had to set these techniques up in their own labs, it would be very expensive and take forever. And so the concept of the physical hub is that it will provide a place where you can go to share some of these experiments, get some of the difficult techniques done by people who've done it many times before.
Because often different centres will have slightly different approaches. It means the data is not necessarily comparable. Whereas if you get all those collaborators funneling their work through one centre, they get their individual results and research, but hopefully that data then will be more transferable between centres.
So new drugs have been developed by other companies and they can approach us And if it's a really interesting pathway we think that they are trying to target, then we will take that further and investigate the mode of action and also to test whether it helps with ameliorating Alport syndrome.
For us as researchers, obviously we want to know more, and the more we know, the more knowledge we can pass on to patients.
And through the hub, we're going to have the opportunity to get in touch with these other groups and companies that deal with patients.
Patients are not typically involved at this level in research, so it's hugely exciting to be involved in both the strategic idea and thinking practically about the different projects that the hub focuses on.
For me, with a child who has Alport, it's really important to see that her future will be brighter than mine, and it's life-changing, isn't it? Without it, we wouldn't be where we are, essentially.
I think the investment that Stonygate have brought to kidney research to enable us to do this will mean that we have the money for several years of funding, and we also have the money for new projects as they arise.
I would encourage anybody who's interested in improving the lives of people with kidney disease to consider Alport syndrome as an area that needs more efforts to improve the lives of patients.
Really exciting opportunity to collaborate, so we really invite people to come up with some lovely ideas around it. Okay, we're moving on to the next session, which Neil is going to take us through, which is focusing on patient registries.
Susie, thank you very much. I think we've really set the ground well for some of the reasons why we want registries, and we've got a little mix of people here really coming from each of the angles that leads us to, with slightly different aims maybe, but leads us to think that they're really vital to what we're going to do in the next 5 to 10 years. Lisa Bonebrake, we've heard, is Executive Director of the Alport Foundation, and therefore is coming from the patient angle. And then we're going to hear from Danny Gale, who we just actually saw in that video in London, who's a particularly genomic researcher, and he's coming from the perspective of a registry that looks at more than just one disease to try and get the economies of scale and some extra effects in there. And then Ali Hariri, who is the Chief Medical Officer for a pharmaceutical company who would really like to do good things in Alport syndrome. So that's the three really important things in this. And is it Lisa, you first?
Thanks so much. So I'm honored to be with my co-chairs today, Dr. Hariri and Dr. Gale, who's online. We do want to begin this session with the patient perspective on registries, and that's where I come in, and some context about the status of patient data collection from around the world. So let me move forward here. So the goals of this session, just to give you a little bit of context, we want to update researchers and clinicians and industry about the status of Alport syndrome registries and databases across the world, discuss the value of human data from the perspective of the three perspectives we discussed, talk about effective structures, data collection and security, and my hope is that we will come away from this meeting having established an international working group for potential collaboration through sharing best practice, challenges, and opportunities. And I want to thank these countries, represented 13, that responded to a survey that we sent out recently about registries. So the patient perspective, why participate in a registry? So I was misdiagnosed with IgA nephropathy for more than 4 decades, which led to the misdiagnosis of my youngest son. It was my son's hearing loss at age 11 that helped us gain his accurate diagnosis of Alport syndrome, followed by my own. And not long after we figured this out, Alport Syndrome Foundation had organized a meeting for patients in our hometown of San Diego, California. I attended alone, determined to begin understanding this rare genetic disease, but I was feeling very overwhelmed. What I remember most from that meeting is that on stage stood some of the world's leading researchers and clinicians in Alport Syndrome. They had recently returned from one of these meetings, an international workshop on Alport Syndrome. Drs. Cashton, Dr. Rowe was there, Dr. Turner from the UK, Dr. Ding from China, and others were volunteering their time to share the latest research and treatment guidelines with us and to answer our questions. It was a bit challenging to follow the conversation as the science was all new to me, but it was so striking and so hopeful to see these great minds all working together across countries and languages and cultures, collaborating to advance research and drive potential new therapies for the rare disease that I had come to understand affects me and my son. The big takeaway from that meeting years ago was that these researchers depend on our human data as patients in order to advance their research. No matter how much they want to help us and are dedicated to our cause, no one can study data that doesn't exist. If I wanted my experience and my son's to matter and make a difference, I needed to share my information in a way that can be scientifically collected. I couldn't have foreseen, of course, at the time that I would end up in the role I have now with Alport Syndrome Foundation, but what I've learned through my work at ASF is that researchers and pharmaceutical companies both need scientifically collected data, researchable data, to be successful in their work, and the quality of that data matters very much. So in sum, the future of potential new therapies and or a cure depends on patients sharing their information. The best source of this data is patient registries and natural history studies. In addition, the data is the only way to help our community better understand which patients are more at risk for disease progression, hearing loss, and other complications, and perhaps find therapies for these complications that also affect our quality of life. So personally, it's now too late to develop a therapy to help my son. Instead of spending last year attending his freshman year of college and enjoying new independence, he faced renal failure, dialysis, and kidney transplant at the age of 19.
And though I'm forever grateful for the research and technology and fantastic doctors that saved his life, and his brother who gave him his kidney transplant is not a cure. It will not take away the risks associated with daily immunosuppressant drug treatment, won't bring back his hearing. I feel strongly that we must, as patients, to do all we can to support our community to bring about new therapies. I practiced this. I really did. I rehearsed in my room. I didn't cry once. I swear I practiced. I feel strongly that we must, as patients, do all we can to support our community to bring about new therapies or a cure that will translate to never needing a kidney transplant or perhaps requiring one much later in life. And let's face it, I want to be a grandparent. My son would make a remarkable father. Collecting human data is so important for all of us living with Alport Syndrome. So that brings us to the next slide, which is the current state of patient registries across the world. In advance of this meeting, we reached out to contacts across the countries involved in the international workshop, requesting information about their registries. This was done once before, in 2014, and so what you see is exponential growth, which is what we wanted to see, right? The slide shows this growth in patient registries, which is definitely hopeful news. It's extremely valuable for both advancing research, but also as we move toward more clinical studies that include sites in more than one country. Great progress has been made and is to be celebrated. The presentation now that we're going to go through has been made from information from 13 patient registries that participated in our recent survey, and I appreciate these contacts so quickly and openly sharing this information for the purpose of this meeting. We are aware that there are other excellent registries, including the Astor Registry at the University of Minnesota. There's a registry in Cyprus, and there are other places, and we hope to keep adding information to this presentation resource and make it available to all stakeholders through our patient organizations and patient registry websites. As she wipes tears from her eyes, I'm so sorry. All right, so we want to show this full list. This is what we're working on, is through the Alport Alliance, is keeping this contact list and making it available on our patient registry websites, on our patient organization websites, and we plan to keep updating this information.
I just want to quickly show you an example of the sorts of information that we collected from this survey. So for example, from Australia, this includes the current number of patients, how the data is collected, who owns the data, the approximate annual operating costs to sustain the registry, what kinds of data is collected, the contact information, and more. And the other countries included in this document are China, Croatia, France, Germany, Israel, Japan, they just started a registry, Lithuania, Poland, Russia, Spain, and the UK. We'll hear in a moment from Dr. Gale, and the United States. Now that you understand this, I hope we can talk about, after the presentation, we do have a few folks that have come forward that I've talked to who are willing to establish this working group with me. And believe me, there are others who know a lot more registries who are actually very qualified, who are world-renowned scientists who would be joining this. So believe me, it won't be just patient-led. But we do want to talk about establishing a working group from contacts of registries around the world so we can collaborate together and share best practice. So now I'll hand things over to Dr. Gale. And Dr. Gale, as you speak, let me know when you would like me to advance the slide, and I'll do so for you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. It's great to be here virtually with you to share some of our experiences of the Radar Registry in the United Kingdom. And what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is to talk about our experience and some of the things that we've learned, but bearing in mind that the sort of health ecosystem varies hugely between countries. So what's possible and easy in the UK is not necessarily directly transferable to other countries. So RADAR, the Rare Renal Disease Registry, was established in 2010, with Alport Syndrome being included in 2013. And it covers around 30 different rare renal disease groups, shown in this table, and now has around 30,000 participants from hospitals right across the country that match pretty well to the population of the United Kingdom. How does it work? Well, all participants sign an ethically approved informed consent form, now electronic or face-to-face. This form includes consent to access, analyse and store their past, present and future clinical record. It also provides consent to access data from other clinical databases, studies and registries that they're part of. And it provides consent for those same patients to be contacted and informed of future research studies that they might be eligible for. All the data are held and processed at a central site, the UK Renal Registry. I won't go into more details about what that is, but it has a very stringent data security and governance infrastructure and it's already in place. It's also got quite a mature informatics infrastructure that allows automated data feeds from all the renal units across the country to feed directly into our database, which of course is quite a unique situation. We've got good capture of initiation of renal replacement therapy and deaths via the Office of National Statistics. We also now have in place a dedicated analysis team comprised of statisticians and clinicians to make sense of the data that's gathered. Recruitment to a registry is always going to be a challenge, particularly for a rare disease. And the approach that RADAR has taken is a very distributed network of recruitment, so 105 hospitals recruiting. There's broad eligibility criteria, which are publicised and available on our website. And the National Institute of Health Research in the UK has provided infrastructure which essentially translates to contribution towards research nurses. Sure. Sorry. So the National Institute of Health Research provides infrastructure based on recruitment, and this is the same network that facilitated the Recovery COVID trial and has proved very effective at motivating and facilitating clinical research in the UK. Importantly, our sites are incentivized to recruit, but they're not resourced to input data, and so there's manual entry of very few fields on recruitment. We rely mostly on site-based mechanisms of enrichment. We've done a number of studies, registry studies, teaming up with the NIHR bioresource. We've done genetic association studies that have provided insights into other rare diseases that we've published to date. But we can also do natural history studies and contribute to randomized controlled trials. This slide just illustrates the power of going back to individual hospitals and getting their back data from their laboratory systems, and we can get, we have got creatinine readings and proteinuria readings going back to the 1980s in some of our participants, allowing a sort of whole life view of what's happened to patients, at least from the point of view of their laboratory results. This has allowed us to gain some insights into the natural history of Alport syndrome. This is a slide I put up last December, and of course there's more work ongoing. The key points that I think are worth emphasising is that databases and registries need ethical approval, they need informed consent for data linkage, and recontact is also an advantage. They need stringent data security, governance and oversight. The clinical data that we hold is extremely sensitive, and there needs to be a robust framework to protect patients. We concentrate on recruitment from many hospitals and rely on automatic upload of data. And we sit in an ecosystem where we've teamed up with other rare diseases. So it's not just Alport syndrome, it's all rare renal diseases. And of course, we've worked with non-renal diseases as well, particularly the genome sequencing studies that we've done. We've avoided a lengthy wish list of manually entered data and taken the view it's far more powerful to get the patient's consent, get the ability to contact the patient, and then build the registry. And biobanking activities, so taking blood samples, DNA, need a whole additional dimension of resources, and that's not something that Radar has got. However, we have partnered with other organisations to deliver this type of study. I also think patient-entered data can be extremely valuable and can address more disease-specific issues. We heard about hearing loss earlier today, and that's clearly an area that doesn't apply to most rare renal diseases. And this is one way where we'd like to develop in the future. And that I think is all that I plan to say. So thank you.
All right, so let's see if I can do this. Yes, I can. All right, so let me actually tell you who I am first very fast, and then I have only 3 slides. I don't have that fancy like Lisa slides here. So I'm Ali Hariri. I'm an adult nephrologist, and for 7-8 years of my life, I did basic science and genetics of kidney disease. And currently I'm in industry. I have worked on 8 rare diseases, and since 2018, I have 2 trials I've had in Alport. And for both of them, I have been a beneficiary of Radar. So I think that's one of the reasons you actually find me here. And I'm now Chief Medical Officer of one company that actually has the Alport trial. So let me tell you why it's important for have a registry for industry. First of all, just let me mention, why is it important to attract the industry? It's important because Matthias disappeared. We are in industry, and we go to our senior management, investors, everybody, and we say, hey, we want to work on Alport. And people say, why? There are hundreds of rare diseases. Why Alport? And I need to make a case. One of the reasons I can make a case is if we have a registry. So what does registry do for us? Registry gives us a natural history of disease, which actually tells us what the question is. What's the problem that you can present it and say, this is going to help me to understand the fundamentals. Now, the other element that the registry does is it helps you with the endpoints and the design in general. So what aspect of the design? The endpoint. When I go to a regulatory agency and I say, this is the endpoint of my trial, they look at me like, why? Why does it matter that whether you lower this or you increase something? Hey, Matthias, you're here. I was just talking about you. All right. Then they say duration, and duration is
long enough? Why is 6 months? Why is it 2 years? Maybe it should be 5 years. And I can argue that, hey, I can do it in 2 years and it's still meaningful rather than trying to have a trial that is 5 years or 10 years. The frequency of assessment, again, does it matter to just do it twice in a course of 2 years, or you need to do it 7 times, 8 times? Use of natural history, particularly in rare disease, has been incredibly helpful to use those data as actually the control arm. So that means that the size of the trials is smaller, and as such the burden and the cost and duration of the trial will be significantly smaller. The other reason that it actually makes the natural history helpful is, for example, actually it was regarding Alport, and in that trial we were looking at rapid progressors. And I was making a case that I cannot do a large-sized trial. And the regulatory people were saying, yeah, and also we need to have something that we actually are convinced that this is safe and efficacious. And I'm like, it's not doable. It's just feasible. It's not feasible. So they said, bring up proof that rapid progressors are a small group of people in Alport. And within few days, actually, we generated data from radar that actually it was only 20% based on the definition that we presented. And that actually convinced them to make it a smaller trial. Again, inclusion-exclusion that fits with the people that you are trying to do with the duration and everything that we are doing. As far as the help with the recruitment, I'll talk more specifically about our case. Regulatory, this is what now buzzword is real-world evidence. So people say, forget trial, just rely on what you get from the real-world evidence. And I'll give you an example. It's not related to Alport, but it's related to another rare renal disease, Fabry. In Fabry, we managed to use real-world evidence to actually get full approval in the United States. This is something that for 25 years, everybody tried and they couldn't. And it was the power of registry that proved to regulators that this is actually beneficial. And also actually for Canada, similarly, again, registry for Fabry, we were changing some things. It was the evidence from the registry that actually convinced them that this is the right thing to do. And also, after all of these things that we have to do, the question, the trial, the approval, it is important to have the registry, because that's how you can actually say, hey, I have this drug, all of you that you have been having this problem, and now we have a solution for it. So very fast, many of the patient community and the physician, they can get access to it. Let me give you an example of the recruitment that, so this is the trial that I've been working on. This is in Alport and the patients who have only nonsense mutation, which is the early stop codons. So you see it in the corner, I have the inclusion criteria, is the genotype and the, that we have, patients older than 6 and EGFR greater than 60. So with all of that, I sought help from radar. And here we are, from the 358 people who actually we had their genotype, we found out how many people had nonsense mutation. And then from those individuals, we found how many of them meet the criteria that we wanted from additional genetic. And we also were interested, obviously, for people who have native kidney rather than individuals who have already had transplant or on renal replacement therapy. And based on that, finally, we limited it based on the age, and we limited it to 11 individuals. So this is the power to have a registry that while I'm sitting in an afternoon, I can sit down and identify the 11 patients that are potentially suitable for this trial. And I just want to say in summary, I cannot talk more about the benefits of registry for the industry, and also obviously in a different perspective from the physicians that we have. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali, for giving the really important perspective of if we want to move on from testing drugs in mice, where we need to be so that we can do these things realistically in people. And Lisa, I'm really grateful for you to getting emotional in a talk on registries. It's actually... It may appear a bit surprising, but actually it is really, really important if we want to move on as a community and get things better for the next generation, absolutely. We're open for questions. Got just a few minutes.
I think I have more a comment than a question. So I think that was a nice introduction to industry trials, or at least what I've heard, but we really need the collaboration with the patient community.
Absolutely.
And like apart from very few diseases like diabetic kidney disease, so all renal diseases are rare. And we have difficulties if regulatory pathways, endpoints are not established. And to overcome these hurdles, this is only possible due to the patient community. So we really need the help, we need the engagement into clinical trials, which is the usual way oncology is pursuing and evolving. And you can see in oncology over the past 1-2 decades that the field has tremendously improved. So we would love to see the same for kidney diseases in the future. I think it's a great momentum, very different from 10 years ago. Like without patient community, so this headwinds will also end. So I would really encourage every patient to be engaged or at least interested to participate in trials, because that's the only way forward. Yeah. And like some KDIGO guidelines, for example, also indicate that if none of the current standard of care therapies are suitable, so like patients should be into clinical trials. And I think altogether we could really make a difference. Thank you.
I don't see anyone disagreeing with that at all. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much. Julia Höfle from Germany. Would it make sense to have one international registry? Because we have lots of national registries with its own focus. But would it make sense to have one global one with standardized questionnaires
I think I can help contribute to the answer to that. We've got a number of challenges there, and one is every nation has different rules about sharing data, and it turns out to be really, really difficult to get consent to completely share them in one database. But what we can do is we can be consistent about the data we collect so that the databases internationally are comparable. And Lisa, you outlined at the beginning some of the work to work out what the registries are doing, and the next step is to see how we can improve them. And yeah, we saw a lovely example from the UK, which is now 10 years, it's taken us 10 years to get this stage, by which we actually have live linkage to results, and so you can very quickly funnel. Of course, we would like everywhere to be able to do that, but there's a good few steps in between. Just even getting this set up in the UK, the data sharing arrangements, there's been a huge amount of work. Internationally, it'd be great if we can do that one day, but at the moment, if we're consistent, we'll be able to share the data. And I just wanted to say one thing about your last slide, Ali, when you showed that you could identify 11 patients. I just want to make it clear that Ali cannot identify 11 patients. He can see that there are 11 patients. He doesn't know where they are. He doesn't know their clinical details beyond the fact that they have a particular type of mutation and an age. It requires the clinicians and the central staff to get involved at that point.
Thanks, Neil, for that. I just want to add something to your comment. I think it's one thing to have one
huge umbrella of this, but it's another thing that on the top, people can coordinate what the fields are. So then eventually when they want to combine it, they can combine it. Because we had this issue with, frankly, was primary hyperoxaluria, and it was all over the place, what fields were connected, how frequently, and so on and so forth. So,
one very quick last question.
So his comment about fields segues into my question about the registries across the world. Is anybody collecting hearing data?
I can say, you know, the questions will be on the database. I know that for the UK, it's just when do they have hearing difficulties? When did they start using a hearing aid? That's all we've been able to do so far.
Yes, and we need to find out more, but most of the registries that responded to the survey actually do collect hearing loss data. One thing that we learned and why we wanted to add this to the registry that we launched in the United States is that it's very helpful to those studying hearing loss to understand the audiograms over time. So their partnership with the National Kidney Foundation, the NKF Patient Registry, Alport Syndrome, is collecting. You can upload your audiogram over and over again, doesn't matter how many you have. We encourage you to upload as many as you can so you can see over time. That's what they want to study, is onset of hearing loss and then over time. And then Dr. Santos, from his presentation today, there are a few other tests that he recommends that we collect and add to the registry. So I think not everybody's collecting the same information. That's one of the big reasons why we want to have sort of this working group and talk about best practice and what is everybody collecting and how we can support research in the different areas, not only in the renal space, but also hearing and ophthalmology.
If I could, I don't know if you can hear me.
We can.
Great. I think it is important to consider carefully what the field should be, but for every field there needs to be a mechanism to actually populate the data within the registry. So having a registry with all possible fields is of very little use if actually in practical terms they're not filled in. So patient-entered data I think is an area that we certainly in the UK could do a lot more to get high-quality data in. And I think that needs thought alongside deciding what information one wants to collect.
During the afternoon, we've been discussing some key approaches and resources that are building up for the future. So core facilities that will help with Alport research, registries that will help with Alport research. It's a huge amount of work to invest in something which is going to take a while to develop and pay back. And these discussions around how we do it are invaluable. Thank you so much for the contributions from here and online. It really shows us where we are heading, hopefully to more and more interesting things to come. Let's move on, and I'm going to hand over to Michelle Rowe again to introduce the next speaker.
All right, so this is one of my favorite sessions in all of our workshops. It's the new therapies talk, where we get to hear about what's coming, what's in clinical trials, and what have we learned since last time we were here. So our speaker really needs no introduction to this crowd, but this is Dr. Oliver Gross, and he is from the Department of Nephrology and Rheumatology at George August University in Göttingen, Germany. And he's going to summarize the new treatment options for Alport syndrome, and I believe he is on a recorded talk. So Dr. Gross can take it away.
Hello, everybody. This is a pre-recorded talk. My name is Oliver Gross, and I might be still on my way from the airport to the convention center. So I hope to join you for discussion later on in person. So the topic of my talk is new treatment options for Alport syndrome, an overview of potential clinical trials. First of all, I like to show you my disclosures. I've been initiator and principal investigator of the first clinical trial in Alport syndrome, and I have been a principal investigator for several other clinical trials as well. One important point is that all therapeutic options I use here are actually off-label use in children. So that's important to keep in mind. The learning objectives of my talk are that you understand the therapeutic targets in Alport syndrome, that later on we can discuss current and future therapeutic options in Alport syndrome, and I think most important is that you can describe the impact of early diagnosis on current and future management options. So my agenda will be, I briefly will describe the medical problem, about the therapeutic targets in Alport syndrome. I will show you how we use the current evidence to bring that from bedside to bench and back to bedside. I will talk about different current and potential trials, and finally I will sum up for clinical practice. Though the clinical trials I will talk about a whole bunch of clinical trials, and I will finish with potential, ongoing or just started or in plan clinical trials in Alport syndrome. So let me show you two cases I have been consulting the last month to show you what I'm talking about. So these are real new cases, not the old one I presented at the European Society of Pediatric Nephrology meeting a few months ago. So the first case is a young male, 27 years of age. He has known hematuria since 13 years, is in ongoing renal failure, and he had a kidney biopsy in 2009 diagnosed as thin basement membrane disease, a little bit of splitted glomerular basement membrane. However, the conclusions by the nephrologist was that Alport syndrome was excluded by this kidney biopsy because of this thin basement membrane disease, which the nephrologist told the patient is a benign disease. Genetics have not done in this patient. This patient has a positive family history of chronic kidney disease, in this case FSGS, and since 10 years he is known to have inner ear hearing impairment. Actually, he diagnosed himself to have Alport syndrome by Google screening, showing that inner ear hearing impairment and kidney disease might be Alport syndrome. So later on we will discuss what his prognosis would have been if we would have started treatment in 2009, and we will discuss what therapeutic options we have today to delay his ongoing renal. And the second case tells you that Alport syndrome is a really international kind of disease, and we need an international effort to better treat our young patients. So this family with a young boy, 3 years of age, originates from Estonia. This boy has hematuria, pretty normal kidney function in terms of estimated glomerular filtration rate. You would never do a kidney biopsy in this young boy, but you would try to do a genetic screening which showed a glycine missense variant, which is the most common variant in Europe. So we know that in fact this is a true family history, positive family history. And later on we will discuss what the prognosis would have been without the screening by the pediatric nephrologist, what I think the prognosis of this young boy would have been prior this IPNA session and after this IPNA session, to show you what we hopefully learned from our discussion. So before I tell you about the ongoing clinical trials, I briefly want to mention that it is important to keep in your mind the therapeutic targets we have in Alport syndrome. So Alport syndrome basically is caused by a weak basement membrane which needs to be protected. So the learning objectives I want to start with is understand the therapeutic targets, and the most important target is the podocyte. The podocyte is the cell that is affected by Alport syndrome, and the podocyte is the target cells that leads to secondary fibrosis and ongoing renal failure. So one important point is that we have a genotype-phenotype correlation. So the weaker the glomerular basement membrane is because of a bad genotype, the earlier end-stage kidney disease will develop and the less response you have to therapy. The second key message is that Alport syndrome is a podocyte disease leading to secondary FSGS, so you do need to protect the podocyte. The third point is that the remaining glomeruli try to compensate, and they compensate with hyperfiltration and increased albuminuria that actually will speed up the disease. And the fourth message is the secondary events actually lead to tubulointerstitial fibrosis that can hopefully be blocked by anti-fibrotic, anti-inflammatory medication. However, you actually need all four goals to be addressed to get an optimal result. So we know from animal models that we do not have to treat Alport syndrome directly after birth. We do have a window of opportunity for early therapy because Alport syndrome slowly develops after birth, and we know from brilliant work by Jeff Miner and others that albuminuria is a driver of the disease, but in other words, it does not mean that you have to wait for albuminuria to show up before you start therapy in a disease that always needs to albuminuria later in life. And another key message here is that we already know from registry data that in adults, the earlier you start therapy, the better you are in delaying renal failure. So in Europe, that would translate to untreated patients. It would lead to end-stage renal failure with about 22 years of age. And the earlier you start, the better you are in delaying renal failure. So we know that early angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibition delays renal failure and improves life expectancy. However, we also know from registry data that in heterozygous patients, we are able to stop, actually to hold the renal disease in most of our patients. These data are actually supported by recent data from Japan and China and also from Europe, telling us the earlier you treat, the better you are in terms of asufficient delaying renal failure, and the better your phenotype is, or let's say the more missense mutations you have, the better your response to therapy would be as well. So if you don't have missense mutations, therapy delays renal failure in Japan by about 12 years. And if you have a missense mutation, it would delay it by more than 17 years on average. So the second learning objectives I'd like to talk about is, well, let's talk about the current and future therapeutic options in Alport syndrome. So the first study we have to talk about ended in 2 years ago. It was the first clinical phase 3 trial we have done in Alport syndrome in children 2 years and older, very early stages of disease with a normal glomerular filtration rate and normal blood pressure. About 50% of the children had an isolated hematuria, and the other 50% had isolated microalbuminuria without macroalbuminuria. The children were treated by ramipril versus placebo for up to 6 years. And the conclusion actually is that we were able to show safety and we were able to show that it looks like that ramipril is already effective at that early stages of disease. So in conclusion, we have treatment recommendations that say that start of therapy is still a balanced decision of parents, child, and the pediatric nephrologist. It should include the family history. However, it does not make sense to wait for dramatic changes of the kidney and scarring and albuminuria in a disease in these young children that always leads to end-stage renal failure. So you would start very early. So it's important to keep in your mind that the effect of the ACE inhibition is that you target actually the podocyte by the local angiotensin system of the podocyte. You target that you protect the remaining glomeruli from hyperfiltration. And it's important, I think, to know that you also attack the secondary events leading to tubular interstitial fibrosis by ACE inhibition. And it's important to know that ACE inhibitors are first line, ramipril is first line, not the AT1 antagonists. The AT1 antagonists seem to be less effective than ACE inhibitors. So the key messages we learned from Early Protect is, it was the first phase 3 clinical trial, so it's possible to conduct trials in Alport syndrome in children. And we learned that the affected families are very high motivated because of the very high unmet medical need. And we also concluded that we have many pediatric nephrologists that are very motivated to improve the clinical care of their children that take care of. We had a slow recruitment. I think the short budget actually was the major cause for that. However, the results still led to treatment recommendations and I will explain that it also led to the need of early genetic diagnosis. And the outcome was quite meaningful because it showed that ramipril is safe at that early stages of disease and seems to be effective. However, the results might take too long time to raise interest for industry and regulatory bodies. And I think important, ramipril is inexpensive, however off-patient, and that translates to lack of interest by industry to promote these excellent results of the trial. If you want to have a closer look at this trial in a video summary, you can scan this dinosaur here or use this link down here. The second trial I want to briefly talk about is the Cardinal Trial. The Cardinal Trial actually had the primary endpoint increase of estimated GFR. It included 30 patients in phase 2 and up to 160 patients in phase 3. However, the trial, which was phase 2, was ended in 2019 and phase 3 ended in end of 2020. Both trial results are still not published, and we know that the FDA did not approve bardoxolone for treatment of Alport syndrome. Unfortunately, Riata refused to provide any update or data for this IPNA session. So why did they not provide an update? Because Riata failed to include patients with negative outcome in their phase 3, phase 2 results, and it looks like that Riata uses the same unscientific and unethical methods for the phase 3 data as well. So what are the negative effects of bardoxolone? It looks like the weaker the glomerular basement membrane is in Alport syndrome, the worse the effect, the negative effect of bardoxolone is. And we think it's about the remaining glomeruli that try to compensate, and this compensation leads to further hyperfiltration in patients treated with bardoxolone, and this actually speeds up the disease. So in conclusion, bardoxolone causes deleterious hyperfiltration, preferably in those patients with the weakest basement membrane without RAS blockade and who react with doubling or tripling of albumin. So the key messages learned from the Cardinal Trial is that actually this was a clinical trial driven by industry with only one compound in their portfolio. Recruitment was very good, actually it was excellent. So in conclusion, money by industry makes a difference in terms of recruitment of patients. Riata sponsored the genetic testing, which was very, very helpful. So again, money by industry makes a difference in early genetic diagnosis. However, the positive results actually reported in press releases by Riata actually only had the goal of increasing the share price. And since summer 2019, the information provided by Riata actually failed to include a significant number of patients with a negative outcome. So the information provided by Riata was never and still is not aiming to fully inform the public, physicians, researchers, or us about the study data. This way, Riata hinders any scientific debate as they hinder us to build an opinion about the value of the data. And another conclusion I'd like to make here is that the EAGLE extension study of the Cardinal Trial and all other trials with bardoxolone should be stopped. The third trial I briefly want to talk about is the affinity trial with atrasentan. Briefly, the primary endpoint is change in proteinuria from baseline to week 12. There are 20 patients with Alport syndrome in this trial. We have preclinical data. The results are expected end of next year, and in my point of view, the key question will be if atrasentan is more effective than an optimal ACE inhibition on its own. The fourth trial I like to talk about is HERA, which has been stopped very recently. HERA included as primary endpoint a change in estimated GFR from baseline to 48 weeks. There were 45 patients in the phase 2 study. However, as I told you, the trial has been stopped by the sponsor in summer 2022, and the key question might be or will be why there were differences in the preclinical to the clinical outcomes. So we had good preclinical data, however, we failed to show it in this clinical Another trial that I think is very interesting and very positive for the upper community is the Fiona trial with Renal. We do have preclinical data with another MRA antagonist, spironolactone. The primary endpoint is again the reduction of urinary protein-creatinine ratio up to 219 children. Young children will be included. The trial results are expected in 3.5 years from now, and the key question will be if finerenone has less side effects than spironolactone. So the therapeutic effects of affinity, atrasentan and Fiona, the finerenone, are marked here. So I think that both medications target the hyperfiltration and they target the increased albuminuria, both of which speed up the disease. So let's talk about the potential clinical trials, which I will show on the next 2 slides. But these slides are provided by Pharmaceuticals, showing you that ELX2 actually leads to restoration of type 4 collagen in nonsense mutations in Alport Syndrome. So the phase 2 open label study includes patients that are treated by 2 months, end of dosing, and are followed up for another 3 months. So this is promising because in other nonsense mutations in other collagens, it has already been shown that you are able to restore in this case, type 7 collagen. And the other trial is sponsored by River 3 Renal Corporation. So these slides are actually provided by this company. So this medication is targeting the lipid pathway of the podocytes. So the podocytes are in a way protected and in terms of survival have improved survival. So that's why this company targets the FSGS patients and Alport Syndrome patients. And this will be the trial design. It's an open label study again, and I think that the study already started or might start very soon. So the therapeutic targets of these 2 compounds are actually to overcome the nonsense mutations, so marked in yellow here, or to protect the podocyte and to protect from a secondary fibrosis. And the last new therapeutic option I have to talk about are the SGLT2 inhibitors. I've already shown you at the last meeting data about a small pilot trial in a patient with Alport Syndrome treated with SGLT2 inhibitors. And the next steps are actually in that we started an international observational trial that we call GUARD Alport to collect data of patients that are treated with SGLT2 inhibitors. We successfully applied for a phase 3 clinical trial, so we are able to hand in a full proposal within the next few weeks. And we think that the fluoresceins actually have a potential of a lifelong delay of renal failure in about half of our Alport patients. namely in those with less severe missense variants. So if you have patients adult patients that you treat with SK2 inhibitors, please report them to us to enable us to collect the data and to better treat our patients. And we started an international effort to collect data of children at very early stages of Alport syndrome to improve standard of care in these patients. So let me briefly summarize what I like to show you. So nowadays, our treatment recommendation use ACE inhibition as first line, and we only distinguish between children and adults in this treatment recommendation. So once an adult has hematuria or mild microalbuminuria and additional risk factors such as high blood pressure, you would treat this adult no matter if he has a autosomal dominant, heterozygous, autosomal recessive, or whatever kind of variant in the Alport genes. And in children, you would distinguish in between heterozygous patients, which we formerly called carriers. So the heterozygous children, you would start treatment in the stage of microalbuminuria. However, in the classical forms of Alport syndrome, you would discuss with the parents to start even earlier, because it does not make sense to wait for further renal damage in this population with a 100% risk of early renal damage. So let me sum up the therapeutic options we have today. So unfortunately, the microRNA 21 trial was stopped, and also the Bartoncelone trial, well, it wasn't stopped, but provided negative results. We have the hope for the SK2 inhibitors in finerenone trials and atrasentan. And I think a great hope is, well, read through our exome skipping therapies in those patients with a severe genotype. But above all, it's important to remember that we need an early diagnosis, and we need an early genetic diagnosis to decide about, well, if the patient has a nonsense variant that can be cured by read-through medication, or by even deciding about the therapeutic response to SK2 inhibitors or ACE inhibitors, the better response in patients with missense variants. You can already show that in the most benign, well, I wouldn't call this variant benign, but less severe variant, we call it in Europe, the glycine 624 variant. So in this population in Europe, we were able to show that the older brothers, the cousins that were not treated, have end-stage renal failure at the age of about 40, 45. And if you treat these patients early enough, you are able to delay renal failure until retirement age or even longer, and you are able to improve the lifespan of these patients. We already knew that from the old registry data, that the younger sibling does better than the older brother, simply because the younger one is earlier diagnosed. So the early diagnosis makes a difference. So let me sum up with these two cases I told you about. So in this young boy with ongoing renal failure, we would have improved prognosis by starting ACE inhibition in 2009 by delaying renal failure by at least 10, 15, 20 years. So it's a shame to have that late diagnosis. And his prognosis and therapy in 2022. Nowadays, still, of course, I would start with RAS blockade. Well, actually, I started with Pharmaceutical. And I will see this, uptitrate that, and I will see this young man within the next 8 weeks and increase the medication, hopefully to be able to delay renal failure by at least some years. However, this young boy in Estonia, you would say that, well, prior to this IPNA session, you would have said, well, okay, we are able to delay renal failure by therapy by about 10 years. But because this young boy has this glycine missense variant, so the genetic testing tells us that we should try to delay renal failure, but this early diagnosis and early therapy by lifetime. So at least this should be our goal here. So in conclusion, each of you listening to our sessions, I think will counsel 2 Alport families at early stages of disease per year. So you and your therapy will keep each family free of dialysis for 20 years. So this session today already saved 2,000 years of dialysis by making early diagnosis and enabling early therapy. So the key take-home message here is, well, this is my daily life as adult nephrologist. We are still able to delay renal failure by several years, by early on RAS blockade, by good nephrolysis, by nephroprotection, lifestyle, and other factors. So that's me. However, you as a pediatric nephrologist, you have the opportunity of making an early diagnosis. So you care and early diagnosis in children with hematuria actually will delay renal failure by lifetime in many patients with missense variants. Because I already take into account that RAS blockade will be delayed by 20 years and upcoming newer therapies will delay it by another decade at least. So thank you very much for listening to my talk, and I'm happy to take any questions, and I like to open the discussion, and I hope I'm already in the room for this discussion. Thank you.
Well, I am very happy that Dr. Gross is here to answer the questions, so I don't have to. And I think we have Dr. Nebelman as well online as a co-moderator. But our first question from Dr. Nada from Tennessee.
Thank you very much for the presentations. The simple question I have, when I have a child with hematuria, can be glomerular hematuria, it may be more specific, and looks from the clinical presentation that the child may have recurrent gross hematuria, IgA, Alport, or thin basement membrane. Isolated hematuria. Should I proceed with kidney biopsy or genetic test at that stage before the development of any proteinuria or abnormal kidney function or hypertension? And will that differ if this child is a boy or a girl based on the information we have now? And the third question comes, when we say early treatment, do we really mean early treatment before the before the development of the proteinuria, just with having hematuria?
Okay, so first of all, I'm an adult nephrologist, so I always say it's based on the decision of an experienced pediatrician.
And we would say do the genetic testing.
Correct.
Yes. I'm aware that this is a little bit different in the US and maybe even in Canada. So in Europe, or at least in Germany, the pharma companies, the health insurances will pay for the genetic testing because they save a lot of money by delaying renal failure. So you may overcome this problem by taking a thorough family history. So if you have another family member, it's quite likely that you have a positive genetic result in terms of Alport syndrome or type 4 collagen variants. And the genotype really helps you to assess the risk, the lifetime risk actually. So if it's a real heterozygous autosomal patient child, I would wait until microalbuminuria develops. And I would try to, let's say, for example, calm down the father with X-linked Alport syndrome who demands to have his daughter to be treated. I would calm him down and say, well, we still have a lot of time if we start therapy with microalbuminuria, because we know seriously we are able to hold the disease. If this girl does not smoke or is heavily overweighted and so on. However, in these classical forms like hemizygous patients, X-linked patients, it just does not make sense to wait until kidney damage developed. It will develop over time anyway, so the sooner you start, the better your chances are to delay ongoing renal failure, and perhaps the better the chances are for the child to be at add-on therapies later on, like whatever will be developed in the next few years.
So if the genetic test is positive with only hematuria, I should start the ACE inhibitors. Depends, of course, on the genetic results.
Yes.
If it's the homozygous.
So
okay.
At least in Germany we would do it. Okay. And in Germany we actually had a time that we decided that we need not to start too early in this heterozygous children.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
We have a question over here. No? You're good? Okay. Joy.
My question is in terms of treating for pediatrics. We're following the 2020 guidelines and we're increasing our ACE inhibitor kind of as much as my son can tolerate mentally, not physically. But at what point do we decide to introduce something like a flozin or an adjunct to his treatment? Do we look for any change, a maximum dose? How do we make that decision?
We just do not know. Again, I'm an adult nephrologist. So as an adult nephrologist, I would not add an AT1 antagonist, but I'm aware that the pediatricians do it more common. So this double RAS blockade we wouldn't do in the adult nephrology world. In the adult nephrology world, it's a lot easier to add a flozin because it's in label. It's so off-label in children with chronic kidney disease that I would say we definitely need a clinical trial for that, and I do hope that the war in the Ukraine does not waste too much money, that my government will be able to sponsor that kind of trial. It's, yeah.
Actually, just kind of further to that, those people okay. Just further to Joy's question, and Neil and I were just talking about this before, is to clarify, is there a proactive benefit to flozin or an ACE taking that earlier?
Well, we do not know. It's like, well, 10 years or 15 years ago with the ACE inhibition. So 15 years ago with the ACE inhibition, physicians told us it's far too risky to start in a child. So 20 years ago, even basic research would say it's so far off target to treat a genetic disease with a blood pressure medication. So nowadays I would say, well, okay, the flowsins have excellent data in adults with chronic kidney disease, but we do not have data in children with chronic kidney disease. So I'm aware that a lot of pediatricians do treat children with other chronic kidney diseases and children with Alports with flowsins, and that's why it's so important to collect the data. So this will be real-world data we will collect, plus hopefully our clinical trial data. So again, the data will be additive to gain confidence. So we just cannot recommend to start flowsins right now in children. It's too off-label.
Yep. One question here and then one question in the back next.
But does that mean flowsins should kick in around age 18 or when they're full grown?
Well, I would start in every child that just passed his 18th birthday. Yes. By the way, flowsins are EMA approved for children 10 years and older with type 2 diabetes. So we think flowsins are safe, but we don't have the data in chronic kidney disease.
One more quick question. In your presentation, you noted no excess animal protein in your diet. Is animal protein differentiated from, say, plant protein, like beans for protein?
We think, well, I don't know if you remember the smelly socks talks. So the smelly socks, you lose, the bad proteins you lose with the urine are the pro-inflammatory, pro-fibrotic chemokines that are reabsorbed and cause tubular damage. So it looks like the more animal meat you eat, the more, well, bad proteins you lose with your urine. So that's why we recommend a healthy Mediterranean diet, but that does not translate to no meat or no chips and no ketchup or whatever. So the whole family with a healthy diet is healthier.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions, one of which I don't think you can answer, but I'll put it first. Do you think we should still use the term thin basement membrane?
Yes, but, well, because the basement membrane is that thin in early stages of classical Alport syndrome, and it's that thin in, well, autosomal heterozygous cases. But we should make sure that this is a type 4 collagen disease, which is in the Alport syndrome spectrum,
yep.
Whatever.
And my second pertains to the guidelines that were published in 2020 concerning investigation of microscopic hematuria, where the level of hematuria was pretty close to normal. I understand it would be persistent, but in Australia we have genetic testing that's funded for Alport, specifically for the Alport genes now, which is exceedingly helpful, but at the same time we could test thousands of children, so how do we find the balance between the two?
Well, right now we try to establish guidelines in Germany, and that's extremely complicated because, for example, the pediatric oncologists tell us once you have microhematuria, every child should be screened for kidney cancer. And, well, imagine all the parents getting scared just because of microhematuria that, first of all, you need a cancer screening. It's nonsense. So perhaps you ask me in 2 years from now to give you a better answer, because we are still fighting to get a better answer. So if the microhematuria is consistent, you just, as a genetician, so it's after midnight in my clock, for example, you just screen the parents and you have your urine sticks on the table and tell the parents, go and test yourself. And if another family member has a microhematuria, it's much more likely to have a type 4 disease.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Gross, and we need to buy him a beer later so that we can hear more about Alport Syndrome clinical trials.
Okay, one final comment, because I really thought about should I comment on the biloxolone trial, and I did because Riata, I asked Riata, all other companies responded and sent me data, and Riata refused to do that. We are still bound with the confidential agreement we have with Riata, but the phase 2 clinical trial ended in 2019 and is still not published. So that's a very, very bad sign. And those phase 2 data that were published included only 25 of 30 patients. And it would be naive to think that the remaining 5 patients that were not reported were the best ones. And it's just not fair not to discuss the results. We need the results to be able to discuss them. So simply the fact that we don't have the results, but the FDA got the results, it's not fair, let's say. And not fair is a fair statement.
And I would add that it's also not fair to the patients who volunteered to be in the study that we haven't had the opportunity to really dig in and understand that as a community. So next I'm going to hand it over to Susie Gear for our wrap-up session. We have learned a lot today.
Michelle, thank you. Oliver, thank you very much. It's a treat to have you here in person too, which is great news. Thank you. I'm just going to, Sam is going to introduce the final video of the day, and then we've got a number of speakers who are just going to come up and summarize the key takeaways from a number of different perspectives. So Sam, if you'll just key the final video, team. Thank you.
Politics, geography, and history might divide human populations and carve them up into different communities, but disease reminds us that we're fundamentally human. So if diseases do unite us as humans, then it's important that our approach to combating diseases is a united front rather than isolated efforts.
In the beginning, it was really difficult to find out information, specifically as a woman with Alport Syndrome.
So being able to have contact with some of the clinicians looking after them and the researchers that are spending their careers trying to develop more treatments, it keeps patients up to date.
Such website may help understanding real patients' needs. On the other hand, if the website can provide some information on the ongoing clinical trial so that patients can find the trial information, who to contact to if they're interested in, or even do a self-assessment to see if they are potentially eligible for the ongoing trials.
I like the research side of it, having a daughter. I like to know what is being done or what is being researched for her future and her children's future with Alport.
there's an opportunity with the resource base to provide detail and information about those treatments.
In terms of supporting patient management, I think what would be most helpful is information about how to make a diagnosis of Alport syndrome and what the current recommendations are for the best way to manage Alport syndrome.
Instead of having to meet up to exchange ideas or email, they'll just be more systematically and easily accessible on some kind of central resource website.
So one of the really valuable pieces of information that the site could help with is information about the latest clinical trials. If we could have a specific area on the site that says, you know, clinical trials happening in your area, people could go and see that and the status of them. It would just be invaluable because that really gives patients an idea about potential new treatments that could help their children or their families.
Al paziente è utile per conoscere la malattia, capire cosa significa, capire quali possono essere proprio praticamente nella vita quotidiana le ripercussioni di questa malattia, ma non soltanto, avere anche speranze di trattamento e speranze di poter vivere in realtà una vita assolutamente normale e per chiarire dubbi soprattutto riguardo ai grandi interrogativi e le grandi paure che questa diagnosi può comportare.
Really, everyone wants research and treatment to progress as fast as possible, so it's in everyone's interest to sign up to keeping that information somewhere central.
Well, the great danger in current activity is that research proceeds before a consultation with patients has taken place. And so when we realise that patients don't actually agree with the objectives or the hypotheses, it's too late. So research needs to be designed with patients and their advocates at the table.
As a team, we can work together to improve patient care and to address the kind of things that people are suffering with the most. Globally, that becomes even more powerful because people from all over the world with Alport syndrome can discuss together about what it is that they struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And as a clinician, ultimately, what we aim for is to try and help people improve their quality of life.
Each country has their own set of researchers and their own protocols and treatments surrounding Alport, which is fantastic. However, having the alliance where all of them researchers and all them pharmaceuticals can come together to find one level ground for all Alport patients is really important for people, especially those that live in different countries where the research might not be as progressed as, say, UK or America.
If the Alport Alliance becomes this great continuous workshop, that would be amazing because then it's an ongoing discussion rather than a once a year or every other year kind of event.
Each country is different, and of course different cultures also need different kinds of messaging, but there is some clear messaging to be done all together, including the importance of genetic testing and making sure that recommended treatment guidelines are the same across the world to make sure that patients get the best care. So by working together, I believe that our messaging can be stronger.
So for a web-based, resource base to function in a really effective way, then that requires funding, and that's where we reach out to commercial partners to invest in this opportunity to bring the research, clinical, patient community together.
So seeing these videos just reminds me of the power of actually bringing us all together. And I'd like to thank Sam very much for putting that together. We're trying to work out what value it would be to communicate through some kind of central digital platform. And I think certainly a lot of the stuff that we've heard today around registries, clinical trials, sharing all this information, particularly for the patient organisations that don't have national patient groups already, is really, really important. So we are looking for funders to help us with that project. That's a really important project that we want to progress. So if anybody knows of anybody who would like to contribute, please let us know. We're looking for collaborative funding. All our projects are collaborative funding because it's a really important principle of what we do. I guess you've got that now. Okay, so for the final session, we've invited a number of people to share their thoughts of the day, to sum up for us. So I'd like to invite up here Michelle, and I'm slightly worried about whether Emmanuel will still be online. Is he online? He is. Oh, he's amazing.
He can go first.
He can go, excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Emmanuel, would you like to sum up your thoughts of the day today? Can we hear? Can't hear. We've asked Michelle and Emmanuel to cover the clinicians' key takeaways. So as doctors, what do you think of this day?
So one of the things that I always take away from these workshops, and today especially, is the patient voice and how important it is to really listen to our patients about what they need and what they're looking for. And I think what we've heard at past workshops is, we need more research and information about hearing, and the whole Alport community has really gotten behind that and tried to put money and resources and collaboration toward improving the research in hearing. So I think what patients have to say really does matter, and we are listening. And when I go back to work next Monday, whenever I get back to work, it's going to be, it just energizes you to kind of throw yourself back into the Alport Syndrome projects and to keep things going. I'm also very excited to hear about all the new clinical trials. I heard from Oliver a couple that I wasn't aware of, so that's great that these are ongoing. At some of our first Alport workshops, we had discussions about, well, do you think we even could enroll a clinical trial of Alport syndrome? It's such a rare disease. Would we be able to get enough people? And there was a lot of hand-wringing about, is this even possible? And I think now we know it is possible. We can enroll clinical trials. We can enroll a couple of clinical trials at the same time. Not all of them are going to work, but that's kind of how this goes. But if we have good preclinical data, move that in a really systematic way into clinical trials in our patients, then we can really learn a lot. So I think that's also very exciting. And I will pass it back to Susie.
Thank you. Do we have Emmanuel? We do. Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Okay. My takeaway, just a synopsis, is first of all, like many other diseases, but particularly so because it's a syndrome, it requires a great deal of collaboration. So, firstly, we need to focus on the sinister part of it, which is the renal aspect. But we also need to consider incorporating all the clinicians, GPs, pathologists, and the ENT, as well as the audiologists and co, so that we can early on see those patients and initiate treatments as soon as possible. But also on the social side, listening to a number of patients talk here, we need to focus on the social aspect. It's important to link patients as much as soon as possible with other patients so that we can get good support from them. And that's a good thing the Alport Foundations and the Alport Syndrome Alliance is doing. So it's also be synergistic in approach by also linking our foundations with other foundations through the Alport Syndrome Alliance so we can build a collaborative network and exchange ideas and also possibly participate in clinical trials and share therapies.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And I know you stayed up late to share that with us, and we are so incredibly grateful. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you soon.
Okay. So I'd like to invite Louise Hopkinson now to share key takeaways from a laboratory scientist perspective.
Okay, so I'm actually going to do a few takeaways on behalf of myself and also Rachel. It's just short of 1 AM in the UK, so she's sent some things for me to relay to you all. So for me, a few of the key takeaways. So the first thing that really sort of struck me was how, so we talked about Judy's work and how, as we're identifying the different types of Alport and the frequency that they are occurring, so that is constantly changing as we get better at diagnosing. And obviously we heard from her that the 85% population for X-linked isn't quite accurate anymore. The other thing is that we've heard from the basic research perspective, we've got now more models for investigating Alport syndrome than we've ever had. We've heard from Jeff about the mice, we've heard from Rachel about kidney organoids, and we heard from Laura about the kidney on chip. So the hope for these is that as we get to know their limitations but also their benefits, that we can use those to better inform preclinical trials for better outcomes for new treatments for patients. Actually, one of the big kind of unique things, I've been to a few of these various workshops, and the thing that stood out to me was that this time we had a really good representation for hearing. I've heard way more today than I've ever heard about hearing, and definitely was very, very naive before today. Judy mentioned a report where they measured the perceived versus actual hearing in individuals with missense variants, and they asked them about hearing loss. And approximately 50% thought they had hearing loss, but actually when this was measured it was closer to 80%. So it's really great to hear work from Dr. Felipe Santos about the investigation and somebody really getting down to that cellular level to understand what's happening in the ear. So that's a massive, massive progress that's been made. And then a little bit from Rachel. So she's talked about the wealth of information that's emerging from genetic studies of hundreds and even thousands of individuals. Is helping us to understand the frequency of Alport gene variants, the overlap with other disorders, the effect that this has on the kidney, and the overlap with diabetic kidney disease, IgA nephropathy, and C3 glomerulopathy. So for me, today has been overwhelming. There's been so much new, even science from a basic science perspective, but it's really great to see that we are making progress. Thank you.
Now invite Neil to talk from industry commercial partners perspective and particularly around registries.
What great meetings these are. They really, really have a long impact on thinking about what we're doing and why and where it's going. And if I just reflect on where we are now compared to where we were at the beginning of getting back together again a decade ago. We spent the first few meetings talking about the interesting things people were doing and working out what project we wanted to do next. It's really interesting that today there's been a lot of talk about building resource that's really going to pay back in the longer term. So we've talked about registries, we've talked about deep collaboration and sharing laboratory facilities in order to further research. And this is extraordinary. And we can see that pharmaceutical companies are seeing what opportunities we have in this relatively rare disease, which therefore gets much more prospect of moving its treatments on faster. The other thing I find is that when I go and speak to colleagues with other interests, in non-nephrology interests, it just reminds me how unusual this kind of meeting is, where we have such an interaction between patients, laboratory scientists, pediatrician nephrologists and adult nephrologists from all around the world, and really productive conversation. It really helps to keep things on track. And increasingly, as the years have gone by, we've attracted more interest from industry, and absolutely we want to do that, because we cannot move on to getting the experiments into humans without that collaboration. So thanks to everyone. Another great meeting.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, we've left the patients till last. So Elia and Aura, would you like to come and sum up from your perspectives?
Hello. So I think the main takeaway for... Actually, I have a couple. So the first one's definitely about encouraging the patients to get involved. I think that's been a key theme for today from loads of different presenters of sort of... I feel like we've been a lot more involved, especially as obviously we're not all completely very sciencey. It's been great over time. From 2019, we've definitely progressed with clinicians and researchers being able to dumb it down a little bit so we can understand our disease and understand exactly what's going on. My second takeaway, definitely, I think everybody's mentioned about the hearing side of things. Definitely Dr. Santos's study was incredible. It's just great to see that more research is going into the hearing aspect because I know that that was something that we weren't really particularly sure on, whereas the kidney, I think, there's a lot more research into that, so it's great that we're hearing more things from the hearing community. I think I'm going to pass to Ilya now.
Hi, a little presentation. I'm Elia from Italy. I'm an Alport patient and also a med student, so I'm very much involved in all this. I was diagnosed when I was 2, so I lived my condition for almost 20 years. And I lived my pathology in a very personal way. I always kept it private. I was always very shy about it, and apart from my family, I never told anybody about my condition. And this workshop has been the opportunity, has given me the chance to talk about my pathology, my condition to my friends. And I realized that in these 20 years I was wrong, because when you share about your condition, when you talk about it, you feel better, actually. So I just wanted to say to all the clinicians, you should talk about these workshops we are having and convince your patient to come here, because this will make them feel less alone in this. They are not alone in this, and because when you share your disease, it feels a little bit less heavy. Thank you.
Elia, I think you summed it up beautifully. Thank you very much. And it's lovely to hear about your journey, and thank you for being very open about it. Oh, gosh, where do I start with the thank yous? Thank you to all of you for being here for part of the discussion. Thank you, too, to all the people who are online, who've been online today. We've had an incredible audience, so I was told by our technical people that on average we've had about 70 or 80 people on through the day, which for an Alport workshop is amazing. And there have been so many of you in the room to ask questions, etc. too. So I can't thank you enough, because it's all the discussion and the questions that really makes these workshops worthwhile. It makes all the effort that we put into them worthwhile, seeing people engaging in the topics. So thank you very, very much for your participation. It is hugely moving to see all the contributions, and I know a lot of you have had incredibly tricky years over the last couple of years, particularly the clinicians, and also the researchers trying to keep the research going over the pandemic. And I can't thank you enough for doing that, because actually, despite the pandemic, I think we are accelerating in terms of our progress. And as a mother with children with Alport Syndrome, thinking about the future, it's really exciting. I can't tell you. It's just so heartwarming. So thank you very, very much to all the personal contributions that you've made, because I know a lot of you go above and beyond your day jobs, and you contribute so much to Alport. I want to thank all the speakers. The standard and quality of the presentations today, I hope you'll agree, has just been phenomenal. The international diversity, the contributions from all over the world is astounding, and we're really grateful for that. But the people that hold it together are our fantastic workshop organising committee. The 34 people who join us on a monthly call, and we have it on a Friday, usually the last Friday in the month, and I'm sure they probably dread it because they just want to go home. But they're usually there, and they always give us really inspiring updates on the things that they're all individually doing when they check in, and then we put the next level of detail together around these workshops. And it is fantastic, and I can't thank you enough. Because you make this community. It's your leadership is absolutely vital, and I can't thank you enough. I'm very moved by it. There you go, Lisa. I have a couple of personal thank yous. I know Julian and Tanya, who've organised this event, and not actually here. They came and joined us for dinner on the first night. But they have been phenomenal about responding to we've become very demanding when we put these workshops together. I think we've had 64 contributors for a day. The team who are managing the online platform, I'd like to just do a really nice thank you to our production team over here. Thank you so much. And particularly to Yuri and to Rowan, who are the team in Czech Republic who've come over here to set it up, just to organise the physical conference space and keep us fed and watered, but also Yuri for all the hybrid platform, the rehearsals he did with us, which helped us understand how it would all work. We also want to thank a personal thank you to the Peterson family, because you're our guys on the ground here in Canada, and you've been brilliant helping us. And we've just got very small thank you, and I think there's been a few baseball caps given to the boys and some T-shirts. But thank you very, very much, Liz. Thank you, Kurt. Now, before we go, in the tradition of Alport workshops, one of the...
I'm sorry, I don't think she knew I was going to do this. And I feel very strongly that one person has been left out of the thanks. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Patrick Walker. I'm a journalist and patient with Alport Syndrome. And I also have the privilege of being your son. Susie has worked for the last 10 years to keep the British patient organisation running. And she has done that whilst attempting to unite, along with her international partners around the world, this incredible Alport patient and researcher community that we now have today. It is probably not obvious to everyone in this room and online the amount of work that Mum puts in. She left a very good job with the government to pursue this, and it's sleepless nights and a lot of work and time and care and gentleness that goes into managing everyone involved in this and creating something that is meaningful to patients and to researchers. So I want to say we're all very, very thankful for you. and for putting this together. Again, with all of your partners, and I don't have anything, but I just wanted you to know that you're very appreciated by this community. Right, you can do your management consultant thing now.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you. I'm inspired by my very lovely boys. It's very obvious, isn't it? A very special team. Thank you, Patrick. And also to Jamie, who isn't here today, but has been to a lot of other events. Okay, thank you. So the social part of these workshops is as important. So we'd like to invite all of you. I don't know whether you have plans for this evening. But we like to see a bit of the places we come to visit. So we've got a walking tour of Calgary at 7 o'clock. And it's just for an hour. Recommend good walking footwear. We're going from the 2 pickup points, the Calgary Marriott Downtown Hotel. Oh, it's just the Hyatt, which is just next to here, isn't it? Liz, thank you so much. Okay, so it's the Hyatt Regency, which is actually attached to this convention centre, and that's at 7 o'clock. So if people want to go and have a bit of a break and a change, they can go and do that. After that, we've got dinner at 8:30 at Char Bar, and if people want the address for that, I've actually got it here. Please come and photograph it, and you are very welcome to come and join us, because it's very much part of our events that you become part of our extended family. And in that spirit, we also invite you to become part of the media team. So we've had our Alport patients have been reporting on things. We'd love you to report on the workshop and what you've enjoyed, what your takeaways are. So please do share it on social media. I think Heidi at the back, as you go, has got a bit of a T-shirt for people, a media team T-shirt, which are sought-after items. So please do go and help yourselves to one of those and consider yourself enrolled in the media team going forward. And I know we've been having conversations about Denmark, how we're going to take things forward. And I really encourage you to talk with other colleagues so that we can get other countries and things engaged as well. Huge opportunity there. Okay, time. Am I allowed to do the tradition bit now, Patrick? We always finish a workshop with one word about how you're feeling before you go. So under your chair is a pink piece of paper and a pen, and there are a few more. And I'd really appreciate people online. People online, if you could write in the chat any feedback, just a word. So I'm seeing in front of me, you hold them up, educated, confident, determined, hopeful, optimistic, progress, energized, inspired, lots of inspired. Oh, bless you, thank you. Connected, part of the family. Tired and inspired. Indeed. Okay, and supported, not alone. Fantastic. That's really exciting to hear. Well, look, thank you very, very much, and we really look forward to welcoming you all to the next workshop next year. And thank you. There is one final thank you. The one person who works tirelessly behind the scenes, and I'm not sure if she's still online, I hope she's tucked up in bed, is Alice Cooper. So a lot of you have been in touch with Alice Cooper. Can we have a stand-up ovation for her to say thank you very much? Thank you, Alice. And I hope you enjoy the rest of IPNA and have safe travels onward travels to wherever you're going. Thank you very much.